here's to the idiot me who filmed all of this and then realized that you couldn't flip the video so you could actually see the book covers. Yeah! Okay, so the first two books I have are found in the fiction section and they're in English. However, they're not really fiction in the sense that everything is made up, because they are based on kind of true events. And they both come from the authors having been involved in the Spanish Civil War in some way, and which is really cool because there are very few first-person accounts of the Spanish Civil War in fiction or non-fiction form. Usually you can get like the general history of it with like all the battles and the dates and the times and everything, but these are a much more emotional, much better kind of rendition than that which you're going to find in any kind of a history textbook. So the first one of those is Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls. This book I just finished literally like an hour ago, and it's not really actiony. It's not something for someone who isn't really motivated to read, because it's kind of slow going. It's taken me like 3 weeks to read it, and I'm a pretty fast reader. But it was very interesting. It did give a really good first-hand account, even though it is fiction, from like the Spanish person's point of view and like guerrilla warfare, rather than the big like battles from like an upper level general or someone like that. And it takes place very much in the mountains of Castilla, and it's kind of cool because the main character is an American who is involved in the Civil War. I'm trying not to give too much away, but it's very interesting. I feel like this was very eye-opening in the respect of kind of showing you more how the common people were feeling and being involved in this war, rather than those who were more involved in the cities and stuff like that. So that was kind of fun. He also wrote another book called The Sun Also Rises, which takes place in Spain, and I unfortunately have not read it. I don't own it. I'm not really sure what it's about, but that's something that you could look into also, should you be interested. Another one that deals with the Spanish Civil War is George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia, and this is one of my favorite books of all time. I love George Orwell. I love 1984, and this book in particular is another one of my favorites of his. He went to Barcelona and to Catalonia with the intention of being a journalist and kind of recording the war. However, he got involved in the fighting, and this is an account, and it's kind of an autobiography of what happened to him while he was there. It's incredibly interesting. There's much more action, and I feel like this book is for those who are not really into reading for the sake of reading and learning stuff. This is a much better book to read if you're looking for a first-hand account of the Spanish Civil War. It was incredible. I love it, and Orwell is a genius in my mind, so this was really fun. It's also very interesting because it talks about how the people in Catalonia, because the fighting in that area is much different than the fighting around Madrid. So that's kind of fun to see the differences in too. So there's another one if you're interested. My next section is Spanish fiction, like fiction written in Spanish. I'm a very advanced Spanish student, so reading is not a problem for me. I, of course, found words that I didn't know and everything, but if you sit with a dictionary, it's kind of boring. Generally, I suggest if you're reading in Spanish to just kind of go with it, because if you are reading for your level, you are able to understand what's going on and to get the gist of the phrase, which will not only help you in the long run in being able to read easier, it will help you in the long run in that when you go to Spain, you won't be trying to translate everything that people are telling you, and you will get the gist of what they are saying and just go with it, rather than saying, okay, he said this to me, now I have to translate it in English before I respond, because you're not going to be able to do that. So, no further ado, the first book is one that I have not read yet. Completed, I should say. It's Don Quixote de la Mancha by Miguel de Cervantes. And this in Spanish is incredibly, incredibly challenging. Again, I would say I'm a pretty advanced student in Spanish, and I've only gotten this far, and that's after skipping over the introduction because I wasn't interested in the introduction. I'm at the third chapter, I think. This is written in Old Spanish because I got the most original volume I could get. That was not a mistake, however, this isn't the reading I thought it would be, and because reading Old Spanish is like reading Old English. However, I don't know Spanish in the manner that I know English, so trying to figure it out has taken me a little longer. Plus, there is a lot of footnoting that goes on, and I feel compelled to read every single bit of it, and it's driving me nuts, so I had put it down. However, this is one of the most classic pieces of Spanish literature that you can find. It is a satirical piece that kind of makes fun of the caballeros in the time that Cervantes was living. And, I haven't seen any movies on it. You hear a lot about Don Quixote, and I have kind of like the idea of what goes on in the book. And so I was interested in reading it. However, I don't know. I can't really tell you too much about it because, as we see, I've only gotten this far. And generally it comes in 2 volumes also, so you might find it that way. I got this one at Barnes & Noble in the Spanish section. Pretty interesting. Really wish I had read more of it. Hope you guys have better luck with it than I do. You can find it in English too. But if you read it in this, good luck. If you read it faster than I do, you're a champ. Onto some more easier fiction. I love this one author, and of the 6 books in Spanish I am showing you in this section, he is incredible, and 4 of the books I have here are from him. This one is much easier reading. It is actually a young adult book, but it's by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. It's called Marina, and it takes place in Barcelona, and it's about a kid who's at school, and he meets this girl, and it's like a love story with a lot of suspense and action, and it's really, really good, and I cried at the end of it, and it's wonderful. I really suggest that you read it, and like I said, if you're not really too advanced in your reading, but you want to try something that's like a legit book, this is a really good one. I had no problem understanding really anything. Again, some of the words you don't know, but my comprehension wasn't impacted by that, so maybe that's something you could try. Really fantastic. He has a bunch of other ones that are like series, like 3-book series that you can try out there, all I believe available on Amazon. But again, really interesting, good book. The next 3 are part of a 4-book series. The 4th one hasn't been released yet. But this series is called The Cemetery of Forgotten Books, in Spanish, El Cementerio de los Libros Olvidados, and I have them all in Spanish. I actually have a couple copies in English, I just haven't pulled them out. But I suggest either reading the first or the second one. They can all be read separately, but if you don't read the first 2 before you read the 3rd one, it's not as, it doesn't impact you as much, and it's just not as great, I would say, having read them. The first one that he came out with is La Sombra del Viento, The Shadow of the Wind, and it talks about Daniel and his friend Fermin. And the thing with the Cemetery of Forgotten Books is that you are able to go in with somebody who knows about the cemetery. You go in and you pick one of these books that is stowed away there because they're not for sale anymore for various reasons. Either, there was something wrong with them and they burned all the books, or the author did something bad and they don't want them sold anymore, or the story tells something that they don't want told, stuff like that. And in this one, it talks about Daniel, and it centers around this one bookshop in Barcelona. And the other really cool thing about this series is that it goes all through Barcelona and like different parts, and like you recognize parts of the city despite the fact that they take place towards like between the 1940s and the 1960s. And if you get the English version of this, it actually has a map of everywhere that Daniel goes, which is really, really cool. And I would suggest checking it out, especially if you're going to Barcelona. So there's that one. The second one is called El Juego del Ángel, which is the Angel's Game in English. And this one is actually a prequel to The Shadow of the Wind, and it's much thicker, as you can see here. These are not short books. But I would suggest reading this one before any of them, not because it's the prequel, but because I find this one incredibly more interesting than Shadow of the Wind, especially at the start. Shadow of the Wind is very slow to start, and I know people who said that they put it down because they couldn't get into it. So I would suggest reading this first, and once you're into the characters and you kind of understand his manner of writing, you'll be much more compelled to go through Shadow of the Wind. But this one talks about a writer whose name I forgot. I'm really disappointed in myself. But it talks about a writer who gets a book from the cemetery of forgotten books, and his life is incredibly impacted by it. And this one actually takes a lot of place in the Park Gel, which is really cool. And it talks about it in, like I said, the 40s or 50s. And it's like really creepy and really awesome. And these books are really, actually Ruiz Zafón's style is very much in the way that he includes everything. It's like love, suspense, action, romance. It's great. And it's really, really fun to read. So there's that one. And then the third one is El Prisionero del Cielo, which is The Prisoner of Heaven. And I would definitely suggest reading the first two before you read this, because this like brings together the first two, and it centers on Fermin, who is the kind of secondary character from the first one, but it's really weird in a way that it includes stuff from the second one that you would want to know first. Again, it can be read alone, but I wouldn't suggest it. Anyway, it's really cool, and these works are just some of my favorite, and I can't explain how much I love them. So please check them out. Again, Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Their fourth one is coming out, I believe, next year. I really hope it comes out when I'm in Spain, because that would be really awesome. The last book I have that's fiction in Spanish is one that I have not read. It's called El Pintor de Batallas, which should be The Battle Painter in English. It was somebody who read it in French that suggested to me, so I assume you can find it. Arturo Pérez Reverte is the author, and it's about a guy who was involved in the Spanish Civil War, and he now paints murals on different buildings and stuff based on different battles, I guess, of the Civil War, and kind of like his reflections on that. And he is being like chased or followed by some other guy, and a bunch of stuff happens as a result of that, and I haven't read it, so I can't really explain it to you, but it's nice and short, nice big font, something you can check into. I'm sure if you can't find this in your local bookstore, because I sure didn't, I had to go to Montreal to find this, and they have a really incredible Spanish bookstore up there, just putting that out there. Anyway, this is one that I heard is really, really incredible and is worth the time to read. So there's that one. And I forgot a book, of course, but this one is available in English and Spanish, so I guess it's okay at the end of this section here. But it is Zorro by Isabel Allende, and in a weird sense, this is not one on Spain and Spanish culture, yet it is. Because it starts in Alta California in, I want to say like the 1800s or something, after you know, kind of everything was settled, but California still wasn't part of the United States. And it talks about really all different parts of like the settling of the colonies. And then the father in this book was from Spain, and like his brother had been the inheritor of his parents, all of his parents' stuff. So as the younger brother, he decided to go to the New World to try and make a living because he wasn't going to really get one in Spain, at least not in like the way he was used to living and like the way he was brought up, which was very common with a lot of people back then. And his son is born to an Indian mother who the father had fallen in love with after they saved her. Kind of, it was weird. But he ends up sending him to Spain to go to school. So you see the book travels from California down to Panama and then across the Atlantic into Spain. The majority of the book in Spain takes place in Barcelona, and which is really great. If you're going to Barcelona, it talks a lot about the gypsies, which is something that we haven't seen really in a lot of the books that I've already mentioned. And then this is really crazy because I did this book for school, and it was really everything that I was interested in all combined in one book, which was, my teacher and I had a great laugh about it. They took the Camino de Santiago to Santiago de Compostela in Galicia, and before returning to the American continent, they got hit in the Caribbean, and then to New Orleans, and then they went back to Alta California. So this book is a really great mixture of a lot of aspects of Spanish culture and Spanish history. I would suggest reading it just because it is fiction. It's very fun. It's very interesting. There's a lot of action. There's romance. And it's by Isabel Allende, who is, despite being born in South America, very well known in the Spanish literature world. So I would definitely suggest it, especially talking about Isabel Allende. This is not one of her most well-known books, so it's kind of really fun to get to know her style. And I read it for a Latin American literature class, and it was great. I found it much more interesting than kind of the normal, like, Casa de los Espíritus, stuff like that. So, there, yeah, that. The next section is all nonfiction and centers generally on history because I'm a history buff, but knowing the history of the country you're going to is really, really important, I think, because history has such an impact on where we are today. So the first book is Rivers of Gold by Hugh Thomas. The subtitle is The Rise of the Spanish Empire from Columbus to Magellan. This kind of deals with the more general, like, Golden Age stuff that you're going to get in a typical history class, because that is one of the few things that you actually study about Spain in a general history course. However, this book is very large, and I think you're going to get a lot of additional information that you had no idea about. Basic history, I haven't read this, unfortunately, so I can't really tell you too much about it, but it looked really interesting. Yeah, 16th century Spain becoming a world power, really important throughout the year. It has this really beautiful, cool picture. Something to check out. It's one of the few that you can find in Barnes & Noble's history section on Spain, so that's fun. The next one is called Ghosts of Spain. This is something that I have not read either, and I plan on taking this with me kind of as my interim entertainment while I am waiting for flights, stuff like that. So the subtitle is Travels Through Spain in the Silent Past. This, I feel like, has more to do with how the Civil War and things in Spain's past have really affected the Spanish people, and how it shows how those events are still impacting the country today. Again, I haven't read it, but it looks really interesting. Came up new. I think I found this in New York City when I went in Barnes & Noble. Yeah. Another one that I haven't read, I don't know why I buy these books and I don't read them, unfortunately, is on the Spanish Civil War, The Battle for Spain. This book is very well acclaimed. I can search for the Spanish Civil War in books, or I can search Spanish history in books. This is always one of the first ones that comes up. I found it in my Barnes & Noble here in a not very Spanishy place, So that says a lot about it. I, again, have not read it. Unfortunately, this is on my list to read kind of next. But it's by Anthony Beevor, Battle for Spain, and looks so good, and I'm so upset that I haven't read it to tell you about it. There you go. And in the last one that I haven't read is Barcelona by Robert Hughes. And I'm really upset that I haven't read this one because it's been on my shelf for like a year or two. And it's just the first line of the back cover here makes me so angry. It says, Barcelona is Robert Hughes' monumentally informed and irresistibly opinionated guide to the most un-Spanish city in Spain. That said, I'm going to reiterate that if you are a very pro-Castilian, anti-Catalan, do not read this. Do not read this. I can't tell you how many, how much some of the people in Madrid, and I've only been in Madrid for 6 hours, I went to the airport and I bought a book on Catalan history, and they looked at me and they're like, you don't want to read that crap. However, I do. I really, really do. Because Barcelona has had such a huge impact on Catalan culture and has lived such a different life than the other cities in Spain that is really interesting. This will give you insights to Catalan culture, to the way the city has kind of grown much differently than Madrid, because it is very industrial, whereas Madrid and Andalusia and kind of the rest of the country outside of that northeast corner has been incredibly different. And I'm just saying that because I know a lot about Barcelona. This is going to be really good if you are going to Barcelona. Please read up on the place you are going to see, because just knowing more about that history will not only give you more of an appreciation for where you're going, but knowing anything like that, I'm sure the people that you're going to be staying with or that you're going to encounter will really, really appreciate that you put in the effort and shown that you're interested in more than just going and partying and having like a year vacation or something. Please pick up something like this, because an opinionated version is the best version, because then you're just so much more connected to the people. Please read this. Along the same lines, I, however, have read this book, and it is called Barca by Jimmy Burns, and the subtitle is A People's Passion. I'm a huge FC Barcelona fan, which is not going to work out for me great as I'm going to Madrid. However, this book, as you can see, I've noted it up a lot, was fantastic. Not only did it give me the history of the club that I love, it gave so much information about the history of Catalonia and the role that FC Barcelona played, because Barcelona played a huge part in the maintenance of Catalan culture and the Catalan language during the Spanish Civil War. And this book, even if you're not interested in soccer, there are parts of this book that you will find really beneficial if you read it. And like you can see, I noted this up. I devoured this book, and it was just really, really wonderful, because you're going to learn history, but soccer is also a very huge sport in Spain, in case you weren't already aware. And just knowing the way that a Spanish football club can kind of play to the hearts of the people is a really, really good thing to know too. And this book is a baby, and I love it. Read it. And since I'm going to Madrid, I went into Barnes & Noble one day and was just looking at the Spanish history section and found Madrid, A History by Jules Stewart. This book was incredible. I can't tell you, I love history, but this book was not like reading history. It did take me a little while to get through it, through the middle, because it was a little less interesting. And I got distracted, I think, reading something else. But it's really cool because it takes Madrid as a small peasant village surrounded by big, beautiful cities of intellect like Toledo, Salamanca, Segovia. And it takes it through how it became the capital of a country when places like Toledo and Valladolid and stuff had such much better claims than Madrid, as this peasant city on the top of a plateau had. And it was really, really, really interesting. And I can't tell you, it goes all through the Civil War and like kind of the role that Madrid played in the Civil War. It talks about how different kings changed the city to kind of make it into this huge cosmopolitan place that it is now. And if you're going to Madrid, please read this book. I'm going to vouch for it as the same way I did for the Barcelona one. Learn about the city you are going to, because the stuff that you can find in here is very difficult to learn from a history textbook. This book was incredible, and just look at the cover. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Please read up about the place you're going to. Read this book. It's so good. Last in this section is Spain, The Root and the Flower by John A. Crow. And again, I'm going to read the subtitle, is An Interpretation of Spain and the Spanish People. This is history, yes. However, it is not the normal boring history that we are accustomed to. This is more of a history in a psychological type way. It talks about culture and literature and art, as well as like the battles, like the Civil War and World War I and stuff like that. This was a really cool book. As you can see, I made a lot of notes, and this took me forever to get through. However, a lot of these notes are books that I am dying to read because of this book, different things that I might be interested in seeing. It was just a really cool way to learn about Spanish culture from a not Spaniard, because I feel like learning history and stuff like that by means of a Spaniard is not always good in terms of reading. But yeah, I really can't say enough good things about this book. I don't know how else to describe it, because it's not, you just have to read it to know. But it does go through everything. It goes from how the Moors were able to make Andalusia so plentiful for them, down through being a Christian kingdom and like kicking out the Moors and the Jews, through the Spanish Renaissance, which you hardly ever hear about the Spanish Renaissance. Politics and Social Order is a chapter title. The Golden Age, and talks about the Bourbons taking over too, which is very interesting, and how that changed Spain kind of for the people and culturally, and how that brought new learning and stuff to Spain, whereas before they had kind of been stagnant. And Main Currents of Spanish Thought. Unfortunately, this book is kind of old. It was written originally in 1982 or something. But then it talks about fascism in Spain, the Spanish Civil War, Order and Progress, and then it talks about Spain in the 1980s and how it changed a bit after the Civil War. So this book is a really good reference. You will learn a lot, and it will be very beneficial to you. And yeah, I suggest that you read this also. Anyways, I hope you have learned something that can help you kind of understand more about Spain, something that you can read if you like to read a lot. I think that this will really help prepare you more to deal with the Spanish people and their history, because I really do believe that going someplace when you haven't done any research or studied anything about the country is just not a good way to go about your trip. I think doing something like that will be more appreciated by the locals, and it will also help you better appreciate what you see while you're there. So happy reading, and if you have any questions about any of the books or anything else that I've discussed or anything else about my trip, don't be afraid to comment either here or on my Tumblr page. Please subscribe, and all the books will also be listed in the links section below. Until the next video, hasta luego!